Hey everyone, today I wanted to do a quick video to bring back some nostalgia. This video we're going to be reminiscing on Yu-Gi-Oh card stories from my life. And it'll be a quick fun video. Unfortunately, the stories I'm going to be centering on are the ones where I got burned. So they're not so joyous to say, but at least you learn a lesson. And these were from way back in the childhood. I know there's tons of people who used to play Yu-Gi-Oh as well. It used to kind of be like Pokemon Go initially, where like all the guys at least at one point had them, and then it died off very quickly. But I was one of those people who kind of stuck with it during and after, and so it was always a big thing for me. I got the video games, and I kept up collecting even after many people quit. Anyhow, the first story is back when I was a wee little kid, and essentially there was this thing around fake Yu-Gi-Oh cards. So you have the real Yu-Gi-Oh cards, right? And then you also had fake Yu-Gi-Oh cards. The first time I stumbled across them was when I was shopping with my mom at a local like Korean grocery store, and they had a section which, of course, we could never afford to buy any cards or many cards, but they had a whole section where they were selling Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Of course, the prices there were pretty high. They were marked up, probably the highest out of anywhere we'd seen. And they sold the real cards, and right next to them, they sold like these like fake Chinese cards that were clearly the wrong language and looked kind of off in the coloring and everything. And so I just found that funny. But they had all these super rare cards that were obviously fake, but sometimes people would rather have the fakes than nothing. I mean, if you had Exodia or something like that, it's still Exodia, right? Anyhow, I just found it amusing. I didn't really buy into the whole fake thing. I thought it was crazy. No one would buy those. Um, but then I went to Chinese school as well. Chinese school is something that may sound familiar to you, but in a lot of places in America, you have these communities of Chinese families, and they want their children to learn read and write Chinese. So on the weekends, usually on like a Sunday or something, um, we didn't get a break. They sent us to Chinese school, and for a couple hours, we had to take a class and learn how to read and write Chinese, which was very difficult, very frustrating, and added to our workload. And so, the classes were pretty good, and in the sense that, while they were really tough, they actually did give us a recess halfway through. So we were kids, right? So sitting through like 2 hours or 1 hour is a lot. So they gave us like a 10-15 minute recess in between. And so, of course, the kids would bring Yu-Gi-Oh cards sometimes. Not all the kids, some kids also, I guess they didn't have the money either, or they didn't have as much. And so many wouldn't have cards, many would have some cards. And this one kid who was always kind of weaselly, you'll understand what I mean by weaselly later, he brought in the only cards he had, which were these fake Chinese Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Now they weren't the one exactly like the ones from the grocery store. They were like a different variant of these counterfeits. They just had a different, also very obviously glossy, fake look to them. And so he showed these cards off, and I saw them immediately, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, wow, those are clearly really fake and lame. Who would want those? And the thing was, with his cards, um, you would assume someone like that to be like, I'm a loser, I have fake cards. But no, he owned them. He was very, very persuasive, and he owned his cards. He was like, yeah, these are the Chinese variant. They're just as authentic. They're just as real. And I, as well as others, went from like, man, those are awful. And somehow I guess he took his insecurity and owned it, because he was so persuasive that he convinced me and a couple other people. And this is something I regret. That Weasley kid, he was so persuasive that he convinced me to trade some of my real cards, which I had spent many years collecting and trading and building. So I had some really rare cards for his fake cards, which was also ridiculous because I didn't have much money, and my parents really didn't spend much on cards. So I was very proud of my collection. I'd spent a lot of years building that up through trades and just saving my own money. Anyhow, so he had this like really nice card that if it was real, it would be like really valuable. It was like that grave digger thing that like it gets stronger depending on how many cards are in your graveyard. So it just gets really strong the further the game goes. And I was like, I need to have this card because he had convinced me in my mind it was real. So that's the first story. The second story also takes place in that Chinese school. And it's funny how I remember the ones where I got burned and it hurt the most more. I think that just is the stronger pull on your emotions, so you remember them more. But, despite me having very limited budget, and sometimes I remember at Christmas, all I wanted and I begged for and I thought of every day was for my mom or dad to buy me a $20 Yu-Gi-Oh tin. That's all I wanted for Christmas. And I remember a couple years I wished it and I wished it, and I guess they didn't understand how much I wanted it. They forgot, or a mixture of the above, or they couldn't afford it, and they didn't get me that. They just didn't get me that. It was too expensive for them, and it sucked. And I always felt like I was the odd man out in the sense that I had less money than my peers for getting Yu-Gi-Oh cards. But that's in certain groups, other groups like church groups and stuff like that. For some reason, when I went to Chinese school, out of all the kids, I was one of the ones on top. So I guess most of the other people had even less money than me. Anyhow, I was somehow regarded as one of those with the best decks in school. And so I wouldn't bring them often. Like once every few weeks, I would bring them. And one day, I think I brought them and put them in my backpack. I didn't even show them to the other classmates that day. I just had them in my backpack that day for Chinese school. And the worst thing ever happened. I went to my backpack after a recess or so just to check it out, and I was like, wait a second, where are my cards? And I noticed about 80% of my cards were gone. Someone had, probably in a very quick moment, so they didn't have time to grab all my cards, they just grabbed a large chunk of my cards, stole them, and they were gone. It was devastating to me. Really was devastating. I think I was one of those who had my cards, and I kept them in better condition than others. Others would wrap them with rubber bands, but I knew that would affect the cards, so I would just keep them like very nice in a little deck holder. I think maybe I didn't have the rubber band. I feel like I didn't, but I was really proud of my cards, and that was devastating. So I actually went around with my friend because we had a little bit more recess left. No. It wasn't during recess. It was at the start. It was okay. So, the next time I was in Chinese school, the next week, I went around I told my closest friend that they had been stolen. So then me and my friend, we went around to every single person that was there, and asked them, "Did you steal my cards?" And the thing is, it was frustrating because attendance is hit or miss. There's at least like 40 classmates, and maybe 5 or 6 of them weren't consistently attending. This same 5 or 6 would be missing from week to week, or it'd be a different 5 or 6 that were missing. So it was frustrating because it could have been one of them, and they could have easily been one of those who decided, oh, I'm gonna lay low and not go the next week. And so I couldn't get a read on it. I would ask these people, they would all say no. And of course they'd say no because they're lying, but I couldn't really figure out if they were telling the truth or not. So it was devastating. There's nothing I could do. You could tell the teacher, what are they going to do? They can't sniff it out either. So it was really devastating. Some asshole out there got my cards. And I think it's a good life lesson that I still learn to this day. Just a couple weeks ago, I sold a expensive Pokemon card, the Charizard Expedition Holo, for about $155 off Facebook. And it was a local sale, but it was far enough that I had to ship it. And everything went smoothly. I had a PayPal transaction planned, but right before I shipped it, he asked me to ship it to a different address than the one listed on the PayPal invoice. And since he had already paid for the invoice, I gave him some good faith. And it arrived. The tracking said it arrived. It was delivered, and he started to file a claim and said he never received it. And he claimed that maybe it was stolen off his porch. And I highly doubt that, because I'd done a couple dozen transactions before that all across the nation. None of that had ever happened. And so he got his money back, and it ruled in his favor because I delivered it to a different address than his. And so that was another scumbag move. And I think he scammed me, but it just goes to show you that, like, there's a difference between just giving people faith and trust and having your bases covered. Because you shouldn't have that naive idea that there aren't really scumbag people out there. There are people who will scam you and steal your stuff if they get the chance. So never have that blind faith that, no one's ever going to do the poor thing if given the opportunity. They are. So there's a difference between that. So that's the second story. It really sucked. And to top it all off, one of the kids had a mom who was dropping off their kids. And he was one of the last people I confronted. So I was already a little worked up. And I asked that kid, like, did you steal your cards? And I kept asking him, not to be a bully or anything, but just because I was really trying to assess that and see if he's lying or not. And I was always the one who was bullied, not the bully. But the mom saw me as the bully, because all of a sudden she started yelling at me like, he didn't steal your cards. He didn't do anything. And I just backed off like, whoa, that was crazy. And, I think the mom had overreacted, even looking back. I think she thought I was being a big bully or something. But I was just asking, maybe in a slightly aggressive manner, but I had a right to, because someone had stolen my precious cards. And I thought that was a very immature thing for her to do as well. I mean, she didn't have to lash out at me. She could have just been like, I promise you my kids didn't steal the cards. I know him very well. Please stop doing that. That's very not nice to do. But she lashed out at me. And I backed off. My friend was like, whoa. And he started laughing like, wow, that was a crazy reaction. So, of course, we couldn't pin it on him either. And it was just very devastating for me. Some weasel got out of there. And that mom showed no sympathy, that Asian mom. You as kids, you look up to your parents like they're these perfect, flawless beings, or they're just high achievers. At least my parents were. They were high achievers. They earned a lot of money and worked very hard to do so. But then when you grow up, you realize, wow, they could act in very immature, childish ways, and they're far from perfect. So that's the second story. And then the third story is another devastating one. Looking back, while they're still very harsh stories, I guess I forgive these people, and they were lessons learned off, I guess, little capital. Nowadays, $20, $100, $200, they're not the end of the world if I lose them. Back then, they were devastating amounts of money, but, you learn from those and you grow. So the third story happened with someone who was historically very impulsive, very much a loose cannon, who, based off his personality at the time, he was very immature and didn't have much sympathy or empathy towards other people, which I think is a weakness. But that was him then. I don't know how he is now as an adult. Maybe he's grown and matured. Anyhow, here I was with that Gravedigger card, that counterfeit card that I had spent a lot of resources to trade for, a lot of resources I had earned through these Pokemon cards or these Yu-Gi-Oh cards that I had. So this guy, he was, I guess you could call him a friendly acquaintance or friend. And so he, as well as a couple other friends, was invited to my house for the first time. And we were playing cards. We were playing Yu-Gi-Oh cards, dueling each other. And we were playing that game. And it was fun at first until halfway through the game, out of all my regular cards, I pulled out the Gravedigger card, or whatever you call that card. It was something like, it's a fairly famous card if you stuck with the Yu-Gi-Oh games for a couple seasons with the TV show, because it's one of those cards that's just like very iconic. It's like I don't know if it's called the grave digger, but it's like this grave creature. Anyhow, I pulled it out at the best moment because it was endgame and I had a ton of cards in my graveyard. And I was like, oh, I'm going to play this thing, win the game because it's going to be so strong. I played it. He took one look at the card, started laughing, and just pulled it from my table. And I was just caught off guard because I never would have expected what he would have done next. So he took it, looked at it, said, man, this thing's so fake. And he started sneering and laughing at me. And almost like before I could even react or really anticipate what he was going to do, he ripped it in half. Now, of course, one, he had no idea how much time and resource I'd spent collecting the cards that I had traded for that fake card, being tricked that was a good card. So it wasn't not necessarily the card itself that I was so pissed off at, but things I traded for it. But I just erupted when I saw that. And of course, even if he knew, he was the type of guy who, I don't know what it was, based off his personality, his upbringing. He just had no sympathy or empathy. Even if he knew that, he was the type of person who didn't care, He saw something that was fake. It made him laugh, which I could understand because at first it made me laugh when I saw how fake those cards were. And for him to just rip it, I thought that was very inconsiderate. I would have never done that in his shoes to go that far because that's someone else's cards. I just flipped around that. I yelled. I canceled the whole game. I took my cards. I screamed. I almost started crying. I went up to my mom, who was also, I don't think she was very sympathetic either because she didn't really understand what the heck was going on. I was just playing with Yu-Gi-Oh cards. But I told her, he ripped my card, and that was such a dick move. And, since she's Christian, she's all forgiving, it happened and stuff like that. But it was a huge deal for me, so I didn't really get the justice from her. And then, of course, this kid, he came upstairs, and he didn't have any sympathy. He followed me up, and he was just like, it was a fake card, it deserves to be ripped. Almost still amused and sneering. So the whole thing was rather crazy. Looking back, part of me still kind of really upset about that. But you have to forgive and move on and learn from the experience. If I were to see that guy now, I understand that who he is then isn't necessarily who he is now. Maybe he's matured. Maybe he has developed some emotional empathy, some sympathy, some care and regard for others. And so you can't always just judge and say that someone is horrible for something that they did as a kid. At the same time, I could see it being a very hard thing for him to be someone so sympathetic and understanding, even as an adult, given how much of a personality he was as a kid. He already had all these qualities to be a dick. So for him to mature, it's an uphill battle. Even for myself, there's a lot of qualities I had as a kid in terms of my impatience and selfishness that even as an adult I struggle with. So you never know, but you don't want to just jump to conclusions and just label someone a horrible person and hate them when they could have matured a lot if I were to ever grow up. So it's best for me to forgive and not let those things happen. And it's a good lesson that really only cost me $50-$60 as a kid to learn. And that was, I don't even know what the lesson was there. I guess it's there are very unsympathetic people in the world, and you have to be prepared for that. And I think it's a weakness. I think not understanding other person's perspective and reacting rashly out like that and destroying other people's property in their house, it's a very impetuous thing to do that can cost you a lot in the real world, because there's consequences when you disrespect someone like that. In that case, nothing really happened, but you never know in the future if it's a more important thing and that person has a lot more power. Uh, so I think that's that. I think it really sucks. It's probably one of my worst emotional memories in terms of Yu-Gi-Oh cards. But it is what it is, and I think in the real world, you have to develop those skills of empathy. And so I think I do have an advantage, even though it doesn't feel like it back then. In terms of, I would have never done that. I would have never ripped someone else's cards up in front of them, because it's such a disrespectful, hurtful thing to do. You're gonna get a bad reaction. You're gonna ruin relationships, and so that's an empathetic thing that you should be able to develop to excel in terms of your soft skills in your career and stuff. But these are lessons learned. You have to forgive. You have to give people a certain level of forgiveness, because who they were as a kid may not be who they are as an adult. It could be, but you have to check the facts, see how they are as an adult, just to give them the benefit of the doubt, because some people deserve a second chance. Some people, once you assess the facts, nope, they're still the same person. Maybe not. But there's the video. Hopefully that was nostalgic for you. And I actually am starting to get back into collecting Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I sold all my cards, which were more modern cards, about 5 years ago. They were stuff I had collected. I was a big Dark World deck builder. And then after that, I ended up this year getting back into some cards. I'm starting to purchase some first edition vintage cards for my collection. I never would have thought I'd get back into Yu-Gi-Oh, but I have. I bought one of the first Blue Eyes White Dragon tins, not the starter deck Kaiba tin because that's too expensive, but one of the a few lines down there's the Blue Eyes tin, and I got that.